encouraging Sabbath rest through discouraging commerce on the Sabbath labor market.
The Sabbath.
Labor policy and the Sabbath.
Labor.
Sabbath. Labor market. Sabbath.
When I was young, one of my favorite shows was The Cosby Show. I can clearly remember Thursday evenings, sitting down for 30 minutes of pretty clean family enjoyment. The main character of the show was Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable, whose primary job was to deliver babies. I learned about how babies are born from watching that show. And one of the lines that has always stuck out in my mind is when Dr. Huxtable would get a call from one of his patients who was having labor pains and contractions. The question he would ask is, how far apart are they? He was asking how far apart those labor pains were so that he could know how soon the birth was going to take place. Jesus used this symbol of labor pains in Matthew chapter 24. And today, I'm going to show you that when it comes to the Sunday law, the labor pains are getting closer and closer. This prophetic pun is very important for you to understand, because as you're about to see, labor and labor laws are going to be a huge factor in the Sunday movement. It was a tool that was used in the 1800s, and it was part of the process in distant history as well. In this short series, we're going to take a look at what's happening today. We're going to look back at what was happening in the late 1800s, and we're going to look at what happened with Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. And you will see that the labor pains are back, and they're getting closer and closer. Today we'll start by taking a look at this gentleman right here. His name is Jonathan Berry, and he's the man that was nominated by Donald Trump for the position of, you guessed it, Solicitor of the Department of Labor. If you didn't know, Jonathan Berry is a huge proponent of utilizing the government, more specifically labor laws, to try to shape society in a way that can promote the observance of Sabbath laws. Far be it from me to put words in someone else's mouth, so please take a look and listen for yourself.
And it's specifically the idea of encouraging Sabbath rest through discouraging commerce on the Sabbath. The proposal that's in our book is amending the basic federal overtime law, Fair Labor Standards Act, to require that overtime be paid for all work done on the Sabbath. Most importantly, for people to have space to worship and honor God, and secondly, to have times of communal rest with their families and with their communities.
I hope you caught that. As I said, he views the Sunday Sabbath as something that needs to be protected and promoted, and he's more than willing to utilize and look to the government to achieve that goal. This is an article entitled Christian Nationalists and Project 2025 Have a Radical Scheme to Remake Your Weekends. This article, published on July 30th, 2024, looked at the Project 2025 document and one of its contributors, you guessed it, Jonathan Berry. Jonathan played a role in fashioning the portion of Project 2025 dealing with labor. And if you hang in there with me, you're going to see why this is so relevant. In this article, it had this to say about the goal of Project 2025. Americans United has been sounding the alarm about Project 2025, a radical Christian nationalist blueprint to remake American society along theocratic lines. And so here it is that a secular organization is looking at the movements taking place in the United States and sees that something is not right. The country is headed in a scary direction because there's a group of Christians in the United States that are gaining more and more power with each passing moment. And it's clear that they are looking for a type of theocracy. Unfortunately, there are many who think that this is much ado about nothing. And so as a result, there are a relative few that are sounding the alarm about this. Now, to be fair, obviously, the goal of an organization like Americans United is mixed and mingled with promoting LGBTQ+ rights and fighting for other things that I may not agree with. However, they are able to see the same things that I'm seeing and the same things that Adventists have seen for almost 150 years, that prophecy foretells there will indeed be a political shift in this country that sees the church trying to control the state. The result will be a pseudo-theocracy that will see the rights and religious freedoms of the individual stripped away. This article goes on to focus on the section of the Project 2025 document dealing with workers' rights, another name for labor. In this section entitled Christian Nationalists Seizing Your Sunday, it says, A section on employment policy written by Jonathan Berry, a member of the Conservative Federalist Society, would, if implemented, subject Americans' leisure time to government oversight by limiting what you can do on Sundays. God ordained the Sabbath as a day of rest, and until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral, legal regulation of work on that day, Berry writes. Elsewhere, he says, unfortunately, that communal day of rest has eroded under the pressures of consumerism and secularism. This is exactly what Adventists have been talking about since the late 1800s. Unlike the interpretations of Revelation 13 discussed by other Christian denominations, in which they have taught several things, that the mark of the beast is a tattoo, or a credit card, or a microchip, or most recently, the COVID-19 vaccine. Unlike many other Christians, the prophetic interpretation of Adventists has been firm and consistent. This interpretation is that religious zealots are going to rise up in this country and try to wield the power of the government to enforce Sunday sacredness. While I won't be able to cover it in detail today, there is a troubling theological framework that lies at the foundation of why many Christians are trying to stage a religious coup of the government. And as these movements are taking place, we need to have our prophetic eyes wide open. Jonathan Berry, along with other Christian nationalists, wants to make special provisions for the observance of Sunday sacredness because Christian nationalists want to make Christianity the national religion. But the interesting thing is that it's not just conservatives trying to do this. And many of you have seen in our video who will pass the Sunday law, Democrats or Republicans, that it's not just conservatives who want Sunday protected. It's also liberals who are fighting for workers' rights and labor laws for the good of society. But once again, don't take my word for it. Listen to the words of these liberal representatives discussing the labor issues and how Americans are being impacted.
I think you really importantly talk about the importance that your faith plays in the work that you do and in your life. There's a pretty wild thing happening in America today. In 2000, 70% of Americans belong to a religious institution, but today that number is 50%. This has been a pretty precipitous decline in the ability or willingness of Americans to go to church or to a religious institution on a regular basis. When you have to work 70 hours to get the same standard of living for your family that 40 hours would have gotten you a few decades ago, you don't have time to go to Wednesday night Bible study. You might not have the ability to even attend church or services on a Sunday.
And so, it's work-life balance. And as I say, when you're working multiple jobs to live paycheck to paycheck, or you're working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, you have to sacrifice, ability to go to church. If it's something else to do on a Sunday, maybe you get a Sunday off and you haven't slept all week and you spend the whole day sleeping. I mean, that is a reality a lot of workers face on some of the schedules they work.
This discussion is crystal clear. People want time off. People want the opportunity to have Sundays free so they can worship and be with their families. And increasingly, we can see that there are many politicians that are more than willing to oblige. These types of laws and discussions are not limited to the United States. In various countries, including those in Europe.
What we really need is synchronized quality times with our families, friends, in our communities and networks. Friends and family are the core of our social life, and more than anything else, we need this quality time that we can all spend together. This is why I'm happily supporting the European Sunday Alliance in our fight for this crucial achievement. The European Day for Free Work-Free Sunday reminds us of the need to take collective breaks and thereby create spaces where we all can come together.
There's an increasing desire to put laws like this into place. While to many this seems harmless, these laws will inevitably be harmful. That's because humanity has a way of pushing things too far and persecuting others, especially the minority, if they don't get along with the majority. I'm looking at you, Dark Ages. What we are seeing and will continue to see is not new. Come with me, and let's take a journey back in time to the late 1800s. It was a time of agitation in society. People saw an increase in crime and violence. They saw an increase in the consumption of alcohol. Many felt that society was on the decline, while immorality was on the rise, very familiar to what we're seeing today. And they wanted a change. They wanted to get America back to what it used to be. In other words, they wanted to make America great again. Hint, hint. What I want you to understand today is that during the late 1800s, we came very close as a nation to having a national Sunday law passed. It was because of people like A.T. Jones, who was more than willing to challenge the encroachment on religious liberty, that society still has the freedom to worship according to the dictates of their conscience. Jones's fight went as far as the halls of Congress to fight for religious freedom, as he stood up against the Sunday bill that was being promoted by Senator Blair. All of this was happening in the late 1800s. At this pivotal moment, we are seeing a resurgence of the movements that were taking place in the late 1880s. And there's a need for men and women who are knowledgeable and intelligent regarding the importance of these issues to speak up and influence society before this thing goes off the rails. Christian nationalism and the Project 2025 documents are indeed the spiritual successor to the work of those in the late 1800s who were trying to remove the separation of church and state. In order to accomplish their goals, various organizations were formed, including what I would like to call the father or grandfather of the modern-day Christian nationalism movement. According to this Wikipedia article, it was an organization named the National Reform Association, whose goal was to introduce a Christian amendment to the Constitution in order to make the United States a Christian state. Founded in 1964, the National Reform Association included representatives from 11 Christian denominations, as well as the official support of a number of churches. It published a magazine called The Christian Statesman. It goes on to say that the National Reform Association desired reverence for the Sunday Sabbath, opposing the distribution of newspapers on the Lord's Day, as Sunday newspapers became popular in the 1880s. As I said, this organization was the grandfather of modern-day Christian nationalism. Both were and are trying to wield the power of the state to promote Sunday sacredness, and it is looking more and more like labor laws will be one of the catalysts for this movement to take shape. The goal was simple, and the reasoning sounded like this. If we can declare the nation to be a Christian nation, if we can amend the Constitution, then we can pass laws that favor Christianity and Christians. We can once again take the reins of society and finally fix what has become so broken. Good intentions, yes, but unfortunately, bad results are often fueled by good intentions. And the intentions of this man, among many others, are some that you need to become familiar with. Because much like Jonathan Berry, this man was obsessed with the relation between Sunday laws and labor laws. His name was Wilbur Fisk Crafts. Wilbur Crafts was a prominent American clergyman, educator, and social reform advocate, best known for his work in Sunday school education and the temperance movement. Crafts was the author of 2 books related to the Sabbath. And just to be clear, for him, the Sabbath was not the true Sabbath on the 7th day of the week. For him, the Sabbath was the trans-Sabbath on the 1st day of the week. His books were entitled Address on the Civil Sabbath, and the second one was named The Sabbath for Man. Crafts believed that the Sabbath is both sacred and socio-political. He believed that it provides rest and spiritual renewal and should ensure workers' rights, protecting laborers from exploitation and promoting human dignity. In other words, labor laws. It was these beliefs that drove Crafts to actively lobby for Sunday rest laws, which led to an organization named the American Sabbath Union. According to the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists, the American Sabbath Union was an interdenominational religious body promoting the enactment and enforcement of strict Sunday legislation. Its leading spokesperson frequently attacked Seventh-day Adventists, and the legislation they promoted drew Adventists into the arena of political agitation. With Crafts' push for Sunday legislation, he often came into conflict with Adventist theologian A.T. Jones, who often quoted statements made by Crafts and other American Sabbath Union leaders in order to demonstrate what he considered the fallacy of their facts and logic. As I already mentioned, Crafts made his ideas known in at least 2 of his books, but I want to read the full name of one of the books that I just mentioned so that you can understand the labor pains that were taking place in the late 1800s and how they relate to the labor pains we're seeing today. The full title of the book is a mouthful, so let's read it together. The Sabbath for Man, a study on the origin, obligation, history, advantages, and present state of Sabbath observance, with special reference to the rights of working men. The title alone should tell you everything that you need to know. The connection between the Sabbath and the working man is clear, and it is absolutely not a leap in thought or reasoning to realize that we are pretty much right back where we were 140 years ago. And that place is this. There's a growing number of Christians looking to implement Sunday laws, and one of the most prominent justifications is under the guise of labor laws and protecting the working man. Good intentions, yes, but based on Revelation chapter 13, they will indeed lead to terrible results. This sentiment was expressed by Ellen White, who lived during the context of the Sunday movement of the late 1880s, when she said this: "The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. Many who unite in the movement do not themselves see where the undercurrent is tending." She understood that they don't really understand where they're headed. She understood that good intentions can have terrible consequences. And it was for this reason, and in that climate, that the book, The Great Controversy, was completed. It solidified the Adventist position on the union of church and state, which is that these two entities were to remain separate. Because looking at the history of humanity, including the forced worship of the golden image in Babylon, the forced prayer that took place in the Persian Empire, the religious persecution of the pagan Roman Empire, and also the persecution of the Holy Roman Empire, we see that history is littered with kings, popes, and lay people who constantly seek to place themselves in the place of God and compel people to worship how they think people should worship. This is what Crafts was trying to accomplish, and this is exactly what will be accomplished if Christian nationalists have their way. The goal is to change the Constitution and do away with what the Christian statesman calls political atheism. And it is for this reason that once again, we are feeling the labor pains. And much like Dr. Huxtable, I can see that the contractions are getting closer and closer. And we are seeing the beginning of sorrows, also known as the beginning of labor pains. This story is not finished because there are even more connections to what took place in the late 1800s that are mirroring what we're seeing today in the movements of Christian nationalism and the election of Pope Leo XIV. Leo XIII, who was Pope during the late 1800s, is going to add another layer to this story that you need to see. And it's going to help you understand that the winds of strife referenced in Revelation 7 were held over 140 years ago, and it sure looks like they're in the midst of being let go. So if you haven't already, subscribe and share this video so that more people can understand the issues at stake. But for now, I want you to understand that God is a God of freedom. He does not force. He does not compel. He does not coerce. And He is looking for men and women who truly understand His character and are ready to reflect His character, to share this message, to help others see the dangers of trying to play God by trying to tell others when and how they should worship. By God's grace, I plan to be one of those individuals, and I pray that you will be as well. God bless, and I hope to see you again for part 2 of Sunday Laws and Labor Pains.